Raiders of the Lost Ark. Book 1, In the Jungle. I sing of arks and the man who first found the riches of Tanis, chasing the forces of evil, fighting the treacherous Frenchman. Tell me, O muse, of that brown-shirted scholar, armed with a bullwhip, brown as the trunk of an oak tree, sounding with roars like a lion, donning the hat which he took as a boy from a man who had beat him, sporting a coat on his back and a trustworthy gun in his holster. Broad-shouldered Jones, though his name was a dog whom he loved like a brother, spent all his youth with the books written down by the wise, not his father. Such was the man who had journeyed to Asia, seeking his fortune and glory. Now he would fight for his life and his love from the Nazis. Tell of his finding the Ark of the Hebrews hidden in Egypt. Come to me now and speak with a clear voice aiding my chorus, calling to mind all the deeds of the brave archaeologist Indy. Strolling through trees evergreen on the slopes of the mountain, he saw mist over glades dropping dew on the leaves, shining radiant sunbeams. 6 there were drawn all around, seeking tracks, reading signs of Jovitos. Wily Satipo tasted a dart, saying, "This must be poison. See, it is fresh. Oh, my soul, I am frightened." Brown-eyed Barranca knew the Jovitos, stating that, oh, if they knew we were here, then trust in our scheme, for fortune comes not to those who are buried. One, though alone, stood below in the light shining down on the river. Broad-shouldered Jones held aloft tattered parchment, though saying nothing, charted a course through the jungle, followed by thieves wanting fortune. One of the 6 had betrayed, drawing near, with a gun in his left hand, trying to take all the gold for himself, though secretly sharp-eared Jones, with the cock of the pistol, knew it was near and was loaded. Whip-wielding Jones, with a flick of his wrist, overcame his opponent. Deep in the heart of the jungle echoed the sounds of the pistol. Brown-eyed Barranca fled to the tree line, hoping for safety. Jones, with the whip in his hand, then holstered the strap on his waistline. Wily Satipo looked on in silence, seeing the fate of his friend, unable to speak or to aid in the death of the scholar. Now the formidable Indy thwarted the scam of Barranca. His friend, equally vicious, conjured the works of a new scheme. Oh, what a wretch that I am in the midst of this mess I have made. Look how he gloats with the whip in his hands. How much of an arrogant fool is this tiresome man if he thinks I'm a dull-minded blockhead. Now for my friend, though I cheat even him on this illum adventure, this archaeologist, needing my brawn and my aid, ought to die. Green-trimmed vines and the like nearly hid all the stones of the entrance. Jones, being sharp-eyed, saw past the brown-barked trees leaning inward. Fistful of sand, he turned to Satipo. Here was my foe who, by all the books he had read, struck me as a man with a skill set, lacking in field work, doctor of Princeton, dogged by the Frenchman, still with a resolute strong will, somehow managed to beat us. Turned in reply, hoping naught but for comfort, wily Satipo squeaked out, "Please, if ye must, but those who have entered the temple breathe in the poisonous air and are cursed with disease and with madness. None I have known are as firm in their heart but as foolish as you." Scoffing at death and holding his whip, Jones entered the temple. Light trickled out from the torch, though in truth the mouth of the darkness, forming around, seemed almost to swallow the pair of explorers. Close to the mouth of the cave stood Jones and Satipo descending. Standing in fear, the crook felt sweat on the edge of his eyebrow. Glossing his cheeks, the beads rolled down to the tip of his nose. There in the cave stood capable Jones, though he'd say he was fearless, still in the depths of his red-blooded heart could feel apprehension. Hazily seeing the threads of a web sparkling white, Jones stepped up, tearing away at a hole in the white-laced home of the spiders. Scarcely believing his eyes, the crook whistled out to the scholar, "Jones, there are 8-legged spiders crawling around on your shoulders." And in reply, "They are harmless, but, as it seems, not for you." Thus was he turning around with a neck as black as the night sky, hearing the hundreds of pattering footsteps marching like soldiers. Thirsting for Icarus blood and a taste for delectable flesh, each spider felt with the hair on their legs the fear of Satipo. Knocking them off with his whip, Jones looked for a sign of the idol. Damp was the cave and the muggiest stench as the two clambered onwards. Soon did the darkness bow to a sunbeam raining from heaven. They saw luminous beams coming down from the cracks in the wall side. Foolish Satipo wished he could bask in the warmth of the sunlight, sheltered by rays cloaking him from the beasts of insidious darkness. Quick-witted Jones reached out to his guide, "Stay out of the light." Rubbing his chin, Jones studied the light and, trusting his instinct, thinking a danger ahead, he stooped underneath the light beam. Just out of reach of the light, Jones carefully glanced at Satipo. "This is a trap," Jones said to the guide, who was fraught by confusion. Brave-hearted Jones then held up his hand to the scintillant sunbeam. Cogs from machines and wheels of concealed traps whirled all around, and out from the moss-covered wall flew gray spears bearing a body. There was a corpse with eyes full of worms and a mouth full of maggots, caught unaware by the tricks of Jovitos, pierced by obscured spears. Ruing the loss of his rival, virtuous Indy in mourning offered a stoical dirge, saying such was the end of Forrestal. Once a formidable scholar, now ornamenting a temple. Feuds, true enough, are between archaeologists, each with elusive fortunes found in the depths of the good earth granted to one man. Come, let us care for our feet and our heads, lest we share in the same fate. Bats echoed ominous strains of despair, though they ventured onwards. Open before them lowered the cave like a knife-wounded gullet, baring its ravenous teeth while swallowing thieves in consumption. Down in the depths of the chasm, Jones saw spikes clawing upwards, reaching with rain-dark fingers, gnarled by the strikes of the natives. Now I'd regret such ill-fated obstacles, but with a smile, nothing by man could keep archaeologists from the unknown. Made resolute by conviction, Jones thrust his whip to the tree branch. Over the dark, he trusted the whip and swung to the far side. Sending it back to Satipo, Jones saw the crook hesitating. Then with a sigh or a gasp, the conman leapt in a panic. The whip, now under strain from Satipo, practically buckled, sending the conman down to his doom, but Jones with a firm hand hurriedly grasped at his belt and pulled him away from the cliff edge. Sweat from his brow dripped down to the blades in the deep of the fissure. Now in a hallway hewn from the rocks in the heart of the mountain, fear of mysterious darkness coursed through the veins of Satipo, drawing the warmth of his blood and steeling the force of his courage. Standing in front was the brown-shirted scholar, pensively musing, "Why would this conman, fool may he be, still follow my footsteps? Just as a sheep to the slaughter, just as the brown-eyed Barranca thought he was sly as the red fox, so does this villainous trickster. I with an eye should carefully spy, lest I meet an ill fate." Stale was the air as the pair of explorers walked down the hallway, both with a mind for the other, silently plotting deceptions. Holding a torch to the darkness, keen-seeing Jones saw an object, cloaked in a warm light. Ah, the golden fertility idol! This was the prize archaeologists sought for, some with a vengeance, killing each other, hoping to earn all the spoils of glory. Bright as a beam and gold as a god, the face of the idol blazed through the room, and, drawing the eye thus perched isolated, mouthing a natural terror, priming the life of its child. Baring its teeth in unbearable pain, the gold of the treasure sparked the rapacious Satipo into financial temptation. Thus spake the conman, raptured by thoughts of his imminent fortune. "Come, let us go, for here there is nothing." "That is what scares me," answered the skeptical scholar, scarcely believing his eyes. Instinct and fear drew his eyes to the gray slab side of the cave wall. Etched on the side in relief were hundreds of ominous faces. Stooping to see the signs of a death trap, Jones saw an impressed footstep hidden by time in the earth-woven fingers of nature, covered in untamed moss as thick as a green-stained fabric. Pressing the trap with his torch, whoosh! Thrust through the air flew a gray dart. "Hold just a while, though I will be back," Jones ordered Satipo. Carefully checking his step, Jones headed straight away down the footpath. Steps were arrayed, each gray as the rock or brown as the nature, which, as it seemed, draped down from the wall while shrouding the machines. Now was his thick blood pounding away through his veins to his red heart. Jones shook his head, orienting his feet and his mind to the pitfalls. Calmly he walked with a rhythm, finding appropriate footsteps. But his heel nearly fell out of step, though swift-footed Indy placed on the rock his foot and exhaled great breaths of relief. Jones thought it wise to avoid the steps at the foot of the altar. Thus did he vault to the side and rebound with an eye on the treasure. Now, drawing close to the gold, the steps circled out like a tree's roots. Oh, what a prize was within the bounteous wealth of its forest! Now face to face with the treasure, Jones saw the aureate sculpture, throned by an intricate gold from antiquity said to be priceless. Cogs up above held stones in their place by a rope left enshrouded, yet down below Jones saw with his mind's eye how to proceed. Quickly the scholar opened the sandbag, grabbing a handful, but with a moment of doubt hesitated and thought of his future. Hopes of a plentiful life, unencumbered by debt or rejection, raced through the mind of the confident scholar lusting for fortune. Chance or a god then opened his hand and loosened his fingers. Sand from his palm thus fell to the earth as he pined for the relic. Inching to grasp the fertility idol were the decisive hands of the scholar, almost exchanging the sand and a barter, much to the profit of Jones and the rendered infertile Jovitos. Thus had the mercantile Indy traded the sand for the idol. Smiling in triumph, Jones walked away with the aureate relic, tracing his steps to Satipo. But alas, was mistaken. Rain-dark rocks from the ceiling burst from the perch up above him, falling around Jones, smashing the floor as the cave came to crumble. Swift-footed Indy leapt from the ledge while clutching the idol, running to safety, dodging the darts as they flew past his body. One of the bolts from the mouths on the wall nearly grazed his fedora. Hoping to keep his hat on his head and his head on his shoulders, Jones hastened on to the Chamber of Light while not looking backwards. Frightened Satipo hurriedly scuttled away on the footpath, caught unaware by the fall of the cave and the doom of the scholar. Hearing the darts as they whizzed past his ears, Jones made for the chasm. Yet up ahead was Satipo, clutching the whip in his bare hands. Standing aware of propitious fortunes, he cracked a smile. Thus stood the fraudulent conman opposite Indy, urging hastily, "Throw me the idol, then shall I hand over both the whip and your rescue." Seeing his options, few as they dwindled, Indy begrudgingly traded the idol, though he was hoodwinked. Look how the ominous slab inches closer. Ha! Adios! Scowling in anger, Jones was betrayed by the false-hearted conman. Quick-witted Jones tarried not, for he saw the wall coming downward. Leaping from perch over chasm, hearing the wall bearing ruin, Jones tried reaching for vines in spite of the wall ever falling. Clambering upward, dreading the sight of the wall inching closer, mustering strength in his soul, the whipless and bruised Jones dived. Thus was he hastily grabbing his whip and rolling to safety, just as the maw of the cave snapped shut in an effort to eat him. Huffing and dusting his jacket, stern-looking Jones saw the idol. Brushing the dirt from the face, he saw a reflected deceiver. Wide-eyed Satipo, mouth drawn agape, stood pierced by the gray spears. Jones, looking onwards, noted his face and panicked expression. 6 of the darts, with blood dripping down from the wounds to the dark ground, pierced through the flesh of a man who ran without careful attention. Cruelly he died while choking on blood as it pooled in his cut throat. Now he'd remain in the tomb he had made for the rest of the future. Wanting the gold, he'd settle for 6 costly pieces of silver. Jones tipped his hat to the cutthroat, giving a brisk salutation. Rightly you spoke when you said you'd regret this. Ha! Adios! Catching his breath, Jones had little time, for there came a danger. Running a short way, dread pierced his heart, for he heard the sound of a boulder, as gray as the twilight, rolling to bring his doom. The ominous boulder, shaking the walls of the cave on its downward path, nearly crushed the trepid explorer. Running from flatline dreams and despair, with an eye on the boulder, nearing too closely. Clutching the idol, quick-footed Jones made a dash for the exit. Trusting in speed as he raced on away from the boulder, Jones leapt. Swift-footed Jones fell rolling away from the door of the temple, shut by the boulder, sealing the ill-gotten doom of Satipo. Circled around were Jovitos, staring intently at Indy. Bows that were drawn all around him, tipped with the deadliest poison. There in their midst was gray-eyed Barranca, though with a pale face. Jones hesitated to speak, but saw in the eyes of the villain vacuous holes of inanimate flesh, which, where there was spirit, now only pits of a carcass. Without a soul fell the body. Thus spoke the treacherous Frenchman. Here once again there is nothing, that you possess which I can't take from your meaningless person. Oh, how you thought I a failure! Oh, what a fiend is this Belloc, you who would pose as a friend to unwitting, unfortunate natives. Oh, if they knew how a wretch like yourself can behave in the darkness. Holding his hand, but hardly his tongue, Jones reached for his holster. Drawing in close, the Jovitos apparently once had experienced death at the hands of a gun. Yet, turning it back to the Frenchman, Jones for a moment tempered the turbulent fears of the natives. Friends I have made in the jungle, sneaking and running my errands. Truly I find them contemptible savages, base and barbaric. Fools that they are, but you cannot warn them lacking linguistics. Pleasantries all must come to an end. Jones, hand me the idol. Look at its marvels. Oh, what a beauty! This will adorn my shelf or perhaps fetch a prosperous price on some lucrative market. Come, can you see that profitable finds are the life of our calling? Great benefactors spend their inordinate bounties of wealth on greater antiquities. Thus, admiration values the relic more than the dust of museums. Jones gave a sigh of submission. Musing the paths of escape, he hearkened to self-serving Belloc, flaunting the idol, saying, Hokano Matusu Hamata. Each of the tribesmen bowed to their gods, but Jones made his exit. Dashing between the trees and the rocks, Jones ran to the river. He had provoked the tribesmen, just like the nest of a hornet, all flying out in defense to attack their helpless opponent. Then through the air stung a laughter from the victorious Frenchmen, raving in triumph, fleeing in haste from the spears of the natives. Jones came upon his mules, but left them behind in a hurry. Now in a wide open field, Jones glanced at the sight of his hunters. Stirred in a frenzy, each one a death for Jones the Defiler. Fish in the water nibbled upon the bait of the pilot, lost in the thought of the sky and his reptile friend in the cockpit. Ah, then a bite he detected, and with a jerk of his hands tried clasping the pole. Jones, sprinting with haste from the threat of the natives, called out to Jock, the American pilot. Dust from the cave flew out in the air as Jones ran away, and seeing the seaplane, once more cried to his friend with a loud voice, "Jock, start the engines." Arrows flew past his hat as he hastily ran to the seaplane. Maybe the size of his nautical prize would cheer up the pilot, though did he know that Jones was in danger, needing a rescue. Trusting a vine and dodging a bolt, Jones swung to the river. Now the Jovitos swarmed to the bank and hunted the scholar, though as he speedily swam, bolts tipped with the deadliest poison splashed all around him. Jones, now catching the tail of the seaplane, clambered on board and sat in a seat and held his fedora. Now in the air they soared over danger up to the red sky. Jones gave a sigh of relief, but suddenly felt at his feet a slithering reptile. Shoving it off, he yelled to the pilot, "Jock, there's a snake in the seaplane. That is my pet snake, Reggie." Then came the horrible memory how as a boy he had fallen down into vats of the cold-blooded reptiles, fearing their venom. "Come, can't you see this is only a pet? You ought to be made of a metal, stronger than steel, untarnished by hardship." Thus spoke the pilot. "Snakes do I hate, and you will not sway me from this conviction." Into the clouds they soared, and Jones, though dismayed, headed homebound. Rose-fingered Sundown offered her hands of return to the scholar, granting him hope at the end of another concluded adventure.